open question that we gave them in light of the almost 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights March on Washington, which was co-coordinated by Bayard Rustin, an out Black gay man who helped to coordinate the march and lead thousands and thousands of people to that Civil Rights March in Washington on that famous day. We're asking our panelists today, based on their innovation, their leadership in movement building, what they feel will be the critical role for this century for the Black LGBTQ community to build safety, economic, and racial justice for all our communities. I'll leave it to them.
I want to begin by suggesting that the legacy of the Civil Rights Movement is definitely something that we can gain inspiration from, and there's a lot there that we can learn from. I think the danger sometimes happens when we try to compare ourselves unfairly to them and not always identify and celebrate the things that we're doing now that work. What I want to encourage us as a community to do is to build upon the successes that we're already making, the good work that we're already doing. It's seductive, I think, even on this panel, to just point out all the things that we're doing that's wrong, all the things that we're doing, all the things that's wrong with our community. And I think one of the major lessons of the Civil Rights Movement that Black queer folk can take from now is resilience, and to identify our assets, the wonderful assets we have in our community. So we just don't focus on the very negative things or the things that are undesirable, but also the things that are working well, the best practices that we've identified and developed.
It's kind of a tough question because I was thinking about it in terms of both sort of anecdotal stories of what are the connections between the Black Civil Rights Movement as well as the modern day contemporary LGBT movement, and then also just sort of like strategies. And so I'm gonna hit it from both points of view. In terms of connections, my initial thought is just working across difference, coalition, and for some reason, this phrase from the ballroom scene keeps coming up, which is get your life. Get your life, which means it's divorcing complacency. And I don't mean just sort of like the disengagement that Simone Bell talked about in terms of like not voting, but I mean just sort of like, okay, I have a community of whatever my identity is, I can go and see myself represented, right? Fill in the blanks, right? But not thinking across who's not at the table, even if you are historically oppressed, and then you have happened to find community, there's still folks that you're not seeing at the table, like the brother Chris talked about. And so not just being complacent, but actually getting your life. Getting your life is often used when they do that dip, you know, that punch. And so similarly, as we're living day to day, it's like, okay, cool, maybe I have a decent job and maybe I have community when I go to you know, Blake's on Sunday night or my sister's room or what have you, but is it safe for everybody? You know, Black Prides, there's very gendered parties. There's the male party, there's the female party. I never know which one to go to. And so in terms of like that sort of like anecdotal stories, again, talking about who's not at the table. In terms of strategies, I'm thinking, again, just in terms of a balance, typical Libra statement, in terms of a balance of both engagement and disinvestment. Disinvestment particularly, as someone else mentioned, like I'm tired of walking outside and marching and all that. Our dollars, how we spend our money, our personal decision making that we do on a day-to-day basis is so important and so impactful. I'm thinking about when conversations around reparations first started back in the 90s, and there was this like Black Friday campaign where if you were of African descent, you try not to spend money on Friday. And the theory was that everybody of African descent, if we didn't spend any money on Friday, we could crash the stock market. So similar campaigns like that, where rather than just engagement loud, it's, you know, we've seen it in like boycotts, silent protests, hunger strikes, everything that takes away to show what happens when our presence is not there in an intentional way, I think is so impactful.
So I think it's very important in any movement, specifically the LGBT/human rights/civil rights movement of today, is that we definitely fight for the areas in which we are oppressed. but we identify the ways in which we're very privileged as well, because that will keep us humble, and that will also force us to come face to face with the people who are not at the table. So that means not assuming that we know how to fix everyone's problem when we have not had a conversation with everyone who is clearly not at the table. I cannot tell you what it means to be transgendered and what that oppression feels like, but I can definitely be an advocate and an ally for the fight. But before I do that, I must educate myself and become compassionate. I think so often we put ourselves in positions where we just want to speak about what this movement should look like, what was done in the day of yesterday and how we can move forward, but we don't have sincere and genuine conversations with one another and humble ourselves in those conversations so that we hear each other. Marianne Adams and Zombie, they're working on a new initiative where they're focusing on aging and elder lesbian identified women, and one of the things I love about that mission is they talk about a concept of co-mentorship. And that means that they're not just pairing the youth with the elders and expecting the youth to walk away or to walk in with nothing to contribute to the table. They're expecting this reciprocal type of relationship to happen. And that has to happen in any movement. We have to be able to listen to one another. We have to be able to go to places we may not have readily been in any situation. Enter into spaces that make you uncomfortable, because that's the only way you're going to be able to attack oppression. And that's the only way you're going to be able to normalize things, is when you force yourself to be uncomfortable until you are then comfortable.
Well, I bring you greetings from Durham, North Carolina, that way. And like y'all, we lost everything in 2010 elections. For the first time in 100 years, Italy is now Republican controlled. And they too are drawing those 10-year district lines. So if anyone understands the importance of voting, this is one. On my drive up, I've been pondering something that's been on my mind a lot. I think, quite frankly, the lesbi, gay, trans movement as we know it is at a moment. We're about on the verge of getting all the things that we've defined as our gay agenda. And the question I have is, and when we get that, then what? And let me explain this to you. There's a real historical understanding when we talk about the idea of civil rights. Because I think that a lot of us in the lesbi, gay, trans movement think that we are a civil rights movement. We are, little c, little r, civil rights. But if we do not remember those who came before us, dealing with the exact same issues based on gender with women, and people of color based on race and ethnicity, my fear is we don't learn that lesson and we go forward and then we're going to say, I got mine, I'm good, I'm out of here. Remember this, that from the beginning, demographically, Marianne started this, by 2050, this country will be majority people of color. By 2050, the state of California already is. But think about this. That's what these lands were before any ships pulled up to these shores. Who was indigenous to these lands? So if we know that that was the beginning and the basis of what the foundation of these lands were. But when the colonization of this country happened, there were two sets of people told, but not you. Women and people of color. And you know the ships we came on, we didn't want to come on those ships, but you know what I'm talking about. So if you know that women were told you do not have the right to vote based on gender and then folk of color were, then we talked about how we had to fight for that and get that right to vote. When we were told that you cannot run for public office based on gender and people of color, they were told, but not you. When they were told, but you cannot have a job based on employment, who already had gone through that? Women and people of color. When we talked about being in the military as a lifelong pacifist, but the fact that they were told, but not you. And then marriage equality. Who dealt with that before LGB? Women and people of color. So if you think about that and realize that the successes that we are about to have now, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, marriage equality, we have to thank those who came before us and they get the sacrifices, but I'm not so sure we understand and get that. And when someone says that we are the new civil rights movement, I would suggest not new, a continuation of. And I say that because if we don't have that long-term perspective, then when you hear these words, which really does give a division, but that's not a gay issue, that's when we find ourselves on opposite sides of the room.